should you buy Resident Evil 4 in 2024? I think it's obvious by the thumbnail itself, but this review is specifically focused on the Resident Evil 4 remake, which was released in the earlier portions of last year. My experience with the Resident Evil franchise is pretty limited. I've only played Resident Evil 3 Remake, which I've heard compared to Resident Evil 2 Remake or other Resident Evil games was a pretty lackluster entry into the series, although I did enjoy it for what it was. But for some reason, as soon as I saw gameplay and trailers for the remake of Resident Evil 4, I was immediately interested. I finally got around to playing the game a couple weeks ago, and it definitely lives up to all of the hype. If you enjoy content like this, consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like. Anyway, we'll be discussing the story and gameplay, of course, without any spoilers, so let's get right into it. Before we get into the major parts of discussion, I want to briefly discuss the game's presentational value. I was taken aback many times at the pure beauty and graphical fidelity of Resident Evil 4 Remake, and the game establishes its atmospheres and environments in a stunning fashion. Every environment in the game, from the forests to the castle, are so well designed and intricately laid out, with every speck of the large open spaces you can wander filled with little details and things to check out. I'm usually one to streamline a game's main story and then move on to the next, but Resident Evil 4 had me looking through every nook and cranny, finding out the deeper details of this haunting world and the journey that Leon embarks on. Even the sound design here, from every step that you take to the subtle moans of zombies in the distance. This game is fitted with a level of quality through every aspect of its presentation. The facial animations, the combat animations, and pretty much every technical aspect of Resident Evil 4 is truly a marvel in presentation. And although I can't compare it to the original as I haven't played it, Resident Evil 4 Remake is one of the best looking games on the market right now. And in addition to just being super fun to play, it's breathtaking on both a technical and graphical perspective. Of course, this section of the video will not contain any spoilers for the game's overall plot and characters, and rather I'll be going over the premise of the game's story and my general thoughts going into the story and what I got from it by the end of the game. Resident Evil 4 follows the story of US agent Leon S. Kennedy, who must save Ashley, the daughter of the US president, from a mysterious cult buried deep into darkness. I can't compare the merits of this story to that of the original game, but from what I've seen online, the remake has updated several components of the game's plot and has added significantly to a number of prominent members of the cast. You venture into a wide variety of different environments in your journey to save Ashley, and the story overall was actually really well written and quite compelling. I don't think I really expected a great story with Resident Evil games, as my only experience with one was Resident Evil 3, which only took 4 hours to beat, and it didn't really have much going for its characters or its story. But in Resident Evil 4, the protagonist is much more likable and has a decent amount of development throughout the course of the main story, and he definitely has his moments, although I wouldn't compare the story and writing of this game to more cinematic experiences like Red Dead Redemption 2. But Resident Evil 4's story had me hooked from the start, and through my 14 hours of playtime, I enjoyed every second of seeing the mystery behind the cult that had imprisoned Leon and Ashley in complete darkness. And it's not just the protagonists Leon and Ashley who were written as compelling and interesting characters, but there's actually several characters within this cast that I found quite intriguing and was eager to see more of. Of course, it's hard to go into the brunt of my points without spoiling parts of the game, but if you're expecting quite a good story from Resident Evil 4, I think it's going to definitely meet your expectations in that regard, as I was pleasantly surprised the story was this well written and that the characters were as cohesive as they were. If you're interested further in the story after playing through the course of this story, there's also the Separate Ways DLC, which will provide you a new story a few hours in length following the adventure of a different character from the cast, which will really expand your journey through the haunting scapes of Resident Evil 4. But one of the best aspects of the story here here is in the game's environmental storytelling. It's not presented in depth like games like Elden Ring, for example, but venturing into specific rooms and locations in this remake can provide you a larger picture of the world around you, and the atmosphere of various locations in the game actually add in a significant way to the game as a whole, making the story here even better than it already is. Overall, if you're eager for a fun and interesting story that is very well written, I can assure you that Resident Evil 4 is not going to disappoint you in that regard. Now, this is my favorite part of Resident Evil 4 and what had me hooked from beginning to end, wanting more even after I saw the credits roll. The gameplay of Resident Evil 4 is so damn good and fluid, and honestly the game's merits shine on its gameplay alone, and I honestly think purchasing the game based on gameplay alone would be a solid decision. We can cut this up into two smaller sections, the exploration and the combat of the game. We'll start with the exploration aspect of Resident Evil 4. As mentioned earlier, the environments and atmosphere of Resident Evil 4 are superb on every metric, and this in itself makes exploration an absolute treat, especially when you pair this with the game's reworked visuals, which are on every level breathtaking. As I also said earlier, I'm not usually one to do extra things in games, and I just try to streamline the game's main story as much as I can. But here in Resident Evil 4, that just felt wrong, as the environments here were packed with so much unforgettable detail and things to explore. The exploration of the open spaces of Resident Evil 4 is one of the most fun things that the game offers to you, and it's not something I really expected. The prior Resident Evil game I've played in Resident Evil 3 was much more linear and closed off, where encounters and locations were also done in condensed spaces. But Resident Evil 4 offers large open environments that you can even backtrack to, akin to something like The Last of Us Part 2, and it definitely complements the exploration in a great way. Being able to find a key, for example, later on in the game, and then backtracking to a specific chest and then being able to open it, not only adds so much replayability to Resident Evil 4, but provides you much more value even in your initial playthrough. There's also puzzles scattered throughout the environments in the game, which can help you find even more little secrets and intricate details that Capcom has masterfully crafted. Speaking of puzzles, there's quite a few you'll encounter both in the main story and during your time exploring the game's locations, and they are usually quite diverse from one another and can add a level of needed challenge that spices up the exploration even further. As you play through encounters and continue traversing through Resident Evil 4's world, there'll also be a shopkeeper set up in various locations in the game, offering different wares most of the time, in which you can purchase to supplement your arsenal further or use it to upgrade existing things you already have. And that kind of leads to another reason why it's so important to explore in this game. Your resources are quite limited, and exploration will provide you with ample resources to take down encounters in a more comfortable fashion. Talking about encounters, I think it's time we delve into the game's greatest component in my opinion, the game's flashy and fluid combat system. I've played one other Resident Evil remake game, so I kind of knew what I was going to get with the combat in Resident Evil 4, but damn does Resident Evil 4 take it to a different level. The combat has been heavily modernized with more recent games in the series, such as Resident Evil 2 and 3 Remake. I've heard that both Resident Evil 7 and 8 take on a first-person perspective, and although I'm sure that makes the experience scarier and possibly more immersive, the third-person action in Resident Evil 4 is something I definitely want more of. The satisfaction of laying a couple of bullets into an enemy's skull and then dropping them to the ground was something that I was constantly appeased by again and again, and it never got boring even by the very end. Like any other survival horror game, you've got limited resources for your weapons and for what you can craft, but through scavenging for resources and exploring the depths of Resident Evil 4, you can scurry enough resources to take down enemies in a more than comfortable fashion. But what really helps the combat in the game is the diversity of the weapons you have. I won't show too many weapons here, only what you see in the early game, but there are constantly different weapons you can acquire for purchase from the shopkeeper, which add their own flair to the combat in the game. From a typical double-barrel shotgun to a rifle to even a magnum revolver, Resident Evil 4 has it all. You can even purchase an RPG if you want, which I can imagine will spice up the combat to great degrees. There is really nothing like the intensity of the combat of Resident Evil 4 and the third-person perspective paired with the punch delivered followed by your attacks, makes the combat here one of the greatest I've experienced in a third-person action game. In addition to the normal gun and run you've got access to, you can also utilize the environment around you in order to take down enemies faster. This can range from explosive barrels to barricading doors and windows, to even being able to drop kick several enemies at a time if you time your kicks right. And if that wasn't it for the combat of Resident Evil 4, you'll be protecting Ashley for most of the game. And this adds another level of complexity to the combat here, as not only do you have to fend for yourself, but you've got to keep the enemies off Ashley, otherwise she'll die and you'll fail your mission. This created some really intense encounters, as I had to make sure I was shooting at all the enemies that were coming my way, but also making sure that none of them were going to kill Ashley. Again, the animations are also superb, and this might be most evident in the killing animations present with the knife you have in the game, which does have limited durability, but through scavenging around you'll find new ones constantly, allowing you to truly have fun with the combat system in Resident Evil 4. If it wasn't obvious already, the gameplay components of Resident Evil 4 are absolutely amazing on every front, and I can solely recommend you buy the game based on this very aspect alone, as not only do you get a bunch of fun on one playthrough, but the added replayability of the game in New Game Plus can provide a new wave of opportunity, making this a must-buy in every way. I think the verdict is obvious now, but yes, you should absolutely purchase Resident Evil 4 in 2024. I purchased the game on sale for about 40 AUD, and honestly, even if I purchased it at full price, I'd be completely satisfied with the experience I was provided, as Resident Evil 4 is packed with a fun and well-written story, interesting exploration, and adrenaline-filled combat throughout its 12 to 15 hour runtime. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, consider subbing to the channel and dropping a like, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.